Hi everyone, how are y'all doing today? I just wanted to talk to you really quickly about plagiarism and Google Translate. It's just going to be a real quick one, but I just wanted to talk about why I prefer that you not use something like Google Translate in this class. There are many reasons why technologies like Google Translate are problematic, but the main one is that language is very complex and language is also very nuanced. So it's not necessarily that you wouldn't get an approximation, right? You wouldn't get something that's close to what it is that you're trying to say. But the problem is that language is complicated, right? So if you're in Spanish 1, the only verb tense that you're going to be allowed to use is the present tense. If you're in Spanish 2, then the only verb tenses that you're allowed to use are the present tense, the preterite, and the imperfect. But Google Translate doesn't know that, right? It's not going to distinguish between these different tenses and the 18, or however you define it, the 115 different tenses that are available for use in the Spanish language. If a subjunctive is needed, it's going to use the subjunctive. If it needs a mandate, it's going to use a mandate. Or the imperative tense, if it's supposed to use a plus perfect or a pluscuamperfecto, it's going to use those tenses, regardless of whether or not that was your intention, right? So that's one thing, right, that creates a problematic kind of use of Google Translate. Now, sometimes people will say, well, what if I just want to translate 1 or 2 words? Now, my recommendation would be to use a dictionary or like a reference source that would help you to understand and to grasp the nuance of language. Now, language is something that is conceptual, right? Language is not something that is that we're all born with, right? We are all born into language communities, but we're born with a language acquisition device, right? So we all babies all over the world are born with a little something in our head that is the structure of language. And then as we learn language, then our brain says, okay, this language only organizes things in subject, verb, and direct object. So any other possibilities start to be eliminated, right? It kind of turns that off, right? Or this language uses a different pronunciation between R and L, right? Or if you grow up in Japan, right, you grow up learning that R and L are the same sound, right? Or if you grow up in a Spanish-speaking country, there'll be a difference in the way that you pronounce the letter, the sound che, right? Or if you grow up in Argentina, right, you might pronounce, you wouldn't pronounce it maybe llegar, right? You would pronounce it llegar, so there are all sorts of differences like that when you are acquiring that language, then your brain says, okay, I do it this way, I don't do it that way, I do it this way, I don't do it that way, right? And that's how language is formed in the brain. So as we are a part of a language speaking community and we engage in that language speaking community as babies, we learn and acquire certain rudimentary elements of language. For example, if in English I was to come up to you and to say, hey, do you want to go to the movies? I might say, yeah, I'm down. Let's do it, right? You would understand, right, that I'm not directionally going down anywhere, or that I am not saying that the movies are in a physical space that is below the area where we're talking about, right? You know that I'm using that word to indicate, right, that I want to go with you to the movies. However, that is a nuance because down is a preposition that indicates an element of physicality, but that's not always how we use it. For example, if someone came up to you and also said, hey, how are you? And you said, well, I'm feeling a little down. You understand that that person doesn't mean you are physically lying on the floor. It means I'm feeling sad right? And there are all sorts of nuances like that in Spanish as in any other language, right? For example, in Spanish, before we eat, we often say buen provecho. It just means like, hey, great food, everybody let's eat now. But there's not a direct kind of translation for that in English. If you came up to someone and you said, oh, I finally did it. I finally published that novel. They might say to you in Spanish, enhorabuena, right? And that doesn't mean now is the good hour for something. It means, yay, I'm so glad for you that you did that. So part of the issue with services like Google Translate and using them is that Google Translate is a literal translation device. And so what that means is sometimes it doesn't understand nuance. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take you through a couple of examples to show you why Google Translate can be problematic. I'm not saying that you can't use it to look up words. I would prefer maybe if you used a dictionary like Lingua or Word Reference, right, that are better. But I'm going to show you why it can be a little problematic. Okay, here we go. I'm going to show you why Google Translate can sometimes be a little problematic. Let's say that I wanted to look up how to say just in case. Okay, so my Google Translate tells me, right, that I can say just in case, por si acaso, right? And that is correct. Now look what happens. Okay, so now I've looked up this other saying, por si las moscas. Now, I'm going to switch these two sayings. And look what happened. Suddenly, this doesn't mean for if the flies. Now look what it means. It's another way of saying just in case. Right? So sometimes Google Translate can be a little funny, right? Here's another one that I'll show y'all guys. Okay? What if I wanted to say, oh, he's just pulling my leg, right? So here, Google Translate has translated it literally, right? Jalando mi pierna. Now, anybody who speaks Spanish would know that this is actually not a way of saying that in Spanish, right? So it doesn't actually mean anything in Spanish other than to physically pull on somebody's leg. So maybe I want to say, okay, well, that didn't seem to work. Maybe I can say, okay, well, making fun of somebody, right? Okay, burlándose de, okay, all right, well, that is to make fun of someone, so that is accurate. What if I wanted to say, right, okay, but now look what happens when I reverse it. Because tomar el pelo is how we would say, oh, you're pulling my leg in Spanish, right? So this is some of the reasons why Google Translate is a little tricky, right? Because Google Translate can be very, very literal. Now, for dictionaries that I would prefer that you use, the ones that I would recommend are Lingua. I like Lingua because it gives you context, right, to the things that you're asking about. And the other one that I would recommend is oh, well, that's the Wikipedia page for that, so that's not right. I thought it would come up. Let's see, word. All right, so here's the other one that I might recommend, which is wordreference.com. Of the two, I prefer Lingua. So the one that I showed you guys first, I prefer this one. Lingua offers forums and all sorts of things to kind of help you with language. So it can be a little bit of a better service. So it's just a little demonstration, but to show you why it is that I don't think that you should use Google Translate in this class, and also why I write very specifically in all the course information that it is not permitted. All right, thanks guys.